The sound of glass breaking on Inauguration Day in Portland, Oregon, as black-clad anti-capitalist protesters attacked a Democratic Party office, was music to the ears of Julio Rosas, the video journalist who recorded these images. That's because Rosas, who works for the right-wing website Town Hall, specializes in shooting viral video of mayhem at left-wing protests. Within minutes of the vandalism, by a handful of activists who broke off from a small march, Rosas posted his video on Twitter, where it racked up over 1 million views. With his tweet, Rosas had beaten his friend and rival, Jorge Ventura of the Daily Caller, by 6 minutes. But when Rosas joined Laura Ingraham on Fox News that night,
Julio Rosas, townhall.com senior writer,
giving national attention to what would have been, without his footage, a local news story, Ventura held the camera for the live shot.
So they want a revolution.
How do you feel?
It's just so hard being me, just constantly on primetime TV.
As a reporter focused on protest movements, I've been studying video of chaotic events for more than a decade, since I live blogged Iran's disputed election, the Arab Spring, and the Occupy movement. And one thing I've learned is that whether a clip was posted online by a witness in Cairo or Kenosha, it always helps to know who shot the video and why. Rosas and Ventura are not household names, but it's important to understand their reporting because they're members of an informal club of right-wing reporters who roam from city to city, feeding the conservative media's hunger for images of destruction and violence on the margins of left-wing protests. In Instagram selfies and podcast banter, these young conservatives who focus their cameras on unrest at racial justice protests jokingly call themselves the Riot Squad. The impact of their work is hard to overstate. Even as they remain relatively unknown, this tight-knit group has produced many of the most viral videos of Black Lives Matter protests over the past year. And those images have helped to create the false impression, relentlessly driven home by Fox News and Republican politicians, that the nationwide wave of protests that erupted after George Floyd was killed was nothing but an excuse for mindless rioting. That's not to say that rioting never happens. It clearly does. And even if you believe that a riot is the language of the unheard, it's undeniable that looting and arson have scarred some communities where anger over racist policing spiraled out of control. But the broader picture is that the Black Lives Matter protests have been overwhelmingly peaceful. Conservatives like to mock anyone who says that, usually by pointing to isolated images of chaos like those recorded by the Riot Squad, or by cherry-picking misleading data. Republican Senator Ron Johnson recently cited data showing that more than 500 racial justice protests last year turned violent. But Johnson failed to mention that the same researchers counted nearly 10,000 more Black Lives Matter protests that were entirely peaceful. According to the researchers, there was no looting, arson, or violence of any kind at 94% of the protests against racist policing. And in many cases where there was violence, it was inflicted on protesters, either by the police or right-wing vigilantes. That's the wide-angle view of reality missed by conservatives obsessively viewing close-up images of violence like those shot by the Riot Squad.
They tore up this local little town to pieces.
To understand how this works, and how 8 journalists have had such an outsized impact on what millions of Americans know about the protests against police violence, it helps to look at some examples. The first and most obvious way that some of the Riot Squad journalists distort reality is through selective, misleading edits of the footage they shoot. At a protest in Dallas 5 days after George Floyd was killed, a member of the Riot Squad, Elijah Schaffer of Glenn Beck's Blaze TV, posted a brief clip that showed the brutal beating of a white man by a group of mainly black protesters. The graphic, disturbing footage was viewed more than 35 million times on Twitter. What Schaffer knew, but concealed from viewers of his edited clip, was that the man he described as an innocent victim of the mob had initiated the clash by threatening protesters with a machete. Video recorded by another witness showed that the protesters responded by hurling stones at the man, who then charged at them, swinging the blade wildly and cutting one of them before the others disarmed him and took bloody revenge.
Oh, hell no! He tried to kill somebody.
After other witnesses posted video of the man's wild machete charge, Schaffer made the rest of his footage available to broadcasters, which showed that he had recorded but edited out the man's aggressive behavior. Among those misled by Schaffer's edit was then President Donald Trump, who boosted it on Twitter and then echoed false claims that the man had died, as federal agents were unleashed on peaceful protesters outside the White House.
Innocent people have been savagely beaten, like the young man in Dallas, Texas, who was left dying on the street.
In the months that followed, Schaffer's misleading clip was used again and again to smear Black Lives Matter, by Senate Republicans, by Kyle Rittenhouse's legal team, and even by Trump's lawyers at his impeachment trial, who played video of the Dallas incident and other Riot Squad clips of protest violence, which they falsely accused Democrats of having encouraged. At the first post-election rally of Trump dead-enders in Washington in November, another Riot Squad videographer, Schaffer's friend and former roommate, Kalen D'Almeida, used the same technique to mislead millions of viewers. The viral clip D'Almeida posted on Twitter showed an older white Trump supporter being punched in the face from behind by a young black counter-protester. The video, which lingered on the man's bloody face, was quickly shared by Trump with the comment, "Human radical left garbage did this." The video was then edited into an attack ad against Democrats that Trump screened for his fans at a rally in Georgia on December 5th.
We need to send a message that if you indulge this kind of politics, you're not just gonna get beaten. You're gonna get beaten so bad you can never run or show your face again in public.
But footage of the same clash recorded by Jorge Ventura showed that D'Almeida had edited his clip to hide the fact that the Trump supporter had started the fight by first violently shoving one anti-Trump protester to the ground and then pushing and threatening to punch several others. But even when their viral footage of unrest at or near left-wing protests is not edited to mislead viewers, the Riot Squad's coverage can still create a distorted picture of reality simply by focusing on telegenic skirmishes and all but ignoring peaceful demonstrators. In July, for instance, the Riot Squad's Drew Hernandez, a right-wing YouTuber, recorded an angry confrontation between Portland police officers and a black female protester who objected to being forcefully shoved by 3 officers.
I'm disabled! I'm disabled! I can't walk and get out of here! I hope someone kills your whole fucking family. That wasn't me, homie. I hope they kill you too.
That clip was immediately boosted on Twitter by Andy No, an influential right-wing video blogger, and even screened for the White House press corps by Kayleigh McEnany in a montage of Portland unrest intended to justify federal intervention in the city.
I hope someone kills your whole family. That wasn't me, homie. I hope they kill you too.
As you can see, that is anything but a peaceful protest.
The following month, Kalen D'Almeida recorded a shocking act of violence on a Portland street, 5 blocks from the main protest site. Typically dressed in black to blend in, D'Almeida describes himself on Instagram as an undercover expose artist, whose aim is to capture footage that can be used to discredit anti-fascists or Black Lives Matter activists. He finally hit the jackpot in August when he recorded graphic video of a white man being kicked in the face and knocked out by a black man who provided security at Portland protests. Hernandez and Ventura were also on hand to capture gruesome video of the aftermath, as the injured man, who was accused by his attacker of trying to run people down with his truck, lay unconscious and bleeding. The video got so much attention on Fox News that the culprit, Marquise Love, who was later jailed for the assault, became a symbol of BLM for many of the network's viewers. D'Almeida and Hernandez contributed to that by calling Love a Black Lives Matter militant in viral tweets which failed to explain that the brutal attack had taken place after a protest, not during one, and was not politically motivated. In fact, a review of raw footage posted online later by Hernandez shows that the incident started after the self-appointed security guard left the site of a protest and encountered the victim drinking beer outside a nearby 7-Eleven. The 2 men eventually ended up on opposite sides of a nasty personal dispute that had nothing to do with politics or the demonstrations. Last August, the entire Riot Squad headed for Kenosha, Wisconsin, to cover protests that gave way to arson and destruction following the police shooting of Jacob Blake. On the second night of protest there, Ventura and Schaffer, who was disguised in a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, came across protesters arguing with a libertarian militia guarding a gas station.
This shit, the value of property has nothing to do with the value of life.
On his live stream, Schaffer gushed over the vigilantes.
What do you think about vigilantism where the police are not able to protect businesses, so citizens are coming in and they're protecting businesses themselves? What do you think about that? I'm with it too. I'm diving with it. I like that shit. That shit's tight.
When Ventura and Schaffer met Rosas in front of a burning office furniture store nearby, it provided the perfect backdrop for all three to record dispatches from the scene.
Obviously, a burning building behind me.
The report Schaffer recorded in front of the flames was quickly turned into an ad for Blaze TV.
America's streets have become a war zone.
You can see the look of joy in my eyes. I'm having a lot of fun.
And Elijah Schaffer is right in the middle of it.
My name's Elijah Schaffer, reporting for Blaze TV, undercover here in Kennesaw, Wisconsin.
The next night, Schaffer and the Daily Caller's head of video, Richie McGinniss, both interviewed a 17-year-old who had joined the militia, Kyle Rittenhouse.
We don't have non-lethal.
So you guys are full on ready to defend the property?
Yes, we are.
Almost everything we know about how Rittenhouse ended up killing two men that night comes from the Riot Squad reporters, who were in Kenosha to document violence by anti-police protesters, but instead recorded video of a pro-police vigilante shooting demonstrators. As the night wore on, protesters eventually tired of being policed by vigilantes and let the militia know. As tensions between the two groups escalated, video shot by Julio Rosas and the Daily Caller's Shelby Talcott showed the three men Rittenhouse would shoot that night: Gage Grosskreutz, Joseph Rosenbaum, and Anthony Huber, in the middle of the heated dispute. After Schaffer interviewed Rittenhouse, he went to a nearby car dealership which was being vandalized. Moments later, Rittenhouse ran into that car lot, pursued by Rosenbaum, a protester enraged by the teenage vigilante's presence. Richie McGinniss, who was following Rittenhouse when the chase began, was running just behind Rosenbaum, with his iPhone pointed at the two men, when Rittenhouse turned and fired 4 shots, striking the protester from point-blank range. Drew Hernandez captured the shooting from across the lot, and then continued filming as he moved in closer, while McGinniss ripped off his Black Lives Matter t-shirt and tried to stop Rosenbaum's bleeding with it. Rittenhouse ran past Hernandez, calling a friend instead of 911. Close-up images of the scramble to save Rosenbaum, recorded by Hernandez and Schaffer, showed that McGinniss's phone, which was in his left hand as he administered first aid with his right, was in record mode at the time. That later prompted speculation online that McGinniss, who released no video of the chase or the shooting, might have withheld incriminating visual evidence to shield Rittenhouse, who was instantly lionized by the Daily Caller's far-right readers and defended by the site's founder, Tucker Carlson.
How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would?
McGinniss, however, told The Intercept that while he thought he had recorded video of the shooting, he'd accidentally hit the wrong button on his iPhone and did not start recording until after the shots were fired. As Rittenhouse ran from the lot, Talcott filmed protesters shouting that he'd shot someone. Moments later, he tripped and fell in front of Rosas, who recorded the teen vigilante shooting at the men who tried to disarm him. Rosas, who's in the Marine Reserves, quickly took cover, but another young video journalist, Brendan Gutenschwager, ran past him and got the clearest images of Rittenhouse shooting Huber, who died of his wounds, and Grosskreutz, who was badly injured but survived. Within 10 minutes of the first shooting, Drew Hernandez and Elijah Schaffer both posted video of the fatally wounded Rosenbaum on Twitter, along with captions that maligned the victim. Hernandez described Rosenbaum as a rioter, while Schaffer made the false claim that the man had been shot while looting a car shop. On his Blaze TV show later that week, Schaffer continued to attack the victims, falsely accused them of committing crimes, and praised the right-wing vigilante for killing them.
I really don't have sympathy for them. I just do not. They were rioters. They were vandalizing a place. Man, do crimes get wrecked? That's what I have to say. Kyle is a hero in my eyes, and I feel sorry for him. I do.
Brendan Gutenschwager is the only Riot Squad videographer who is not either employed by a conservative news site or openly right-wing. But before he started filming protests, Gutenschwager traveled the country as a Donald Trump groupie, attending at least 24 Trump rallies before the 2018 midterms, and describing them as exhilarating on his video blog.
So who are you gonna call? Brandon?
Gutenschwager has been a guest on Fox News, but he supports himself with donations from fans. He also sells his footage through the news agency Storyful, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, but licenses video from social media to broadcasters across the political spectrum. Even so, Gutenschwager's video of mayhem at left-wing protests is frequently used by right-wing outlets and meme creators to smear the demonstrators.
Got this like hamburger charbroiled smell going on right now.
In September, for instance, Gutenschwager was alongside Talcott and Rosas as they covered protests in Louisville, Kentucky, following the decision to not charge the police officer who shot Breonna Taylor with killing her. All three recorded a scene that quickly became the focus of huge attention on the right. Protesters picking up banners and shields from a rented U-Haul truck. The fact that left-wing protesters prepare to demonstrate should hardly be surprising, but the Riot Squad video of the U-Haul reignited baseless right-wing conspiracy theories that Black Lives Matter protesters were paid by George Soros. As the three video clips racked up more than 11 million total views on Twitter and flooded conservative TV channels, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham all demanded to know who had rented the truck, as if only a billionaire could afford a U-Haul. Speaking to Glenn Beck after Kenosha, Elijah Schaffer scoffed at the notion that the Riot Squad's reporting was biased.
But the people who were there, I always say this, even if you don't like their commentary, video evidence does not lie.
The truth is that video doesn't lie, but it can be used to mislead, as Schaffer himself proved by releasing selectively edited footage of the fight he witnessed in Dallas. But even unedited footage is often used to mislead viewers. That's because even when the Riot Squad videographers accurately record what they witness, their selective focus on unrest after police shootings helps conservative outlets demonize Black Lives Matter protesters. For a textbook example of how this works, let's look at how the Riot Squad covered a racial justice protest in Philadelphia last October, a week before the election. The protests erupted in West Philadelphia after a bystander filmed the fatal police shooting of Walter Wallace Jr., a black man whose family said he was experiencing a mental health crisis. That night, after the police clashed with protesters in the neighborhood, there was some vandalism and looting, which Wallace's family forcefully condemned.
And I don't condone no violence, tearing up the city, looting up the stores.
The next night, Julio Rosas, Jorge Ventura, Shelby Talcott, Richie McGinniss, and Elijah Schaffer were all on hand as protesters rallied peacefully at a park in West Philadelphia and then marched to a police station. They filmed a tense face-off between protesters and a line of officers outside the station. But since there was no violence, only one of their clips got any traction on social media. Video of a woman screaming at the police.
Fuck you! Every black person out here, fuck all y'all!
Later that night, there were minor skirmishes in West Philadelphia, but by then the Riot Squad had left the protest and driven across the city to cover a more telegenic scene, the mass looting of a shopping center 10 miles away. As Talcott and Rosas filmed inside a ransacked Five Below discount store, looters could be heard telling Schaffer to stop recording them and then seen punching him in the mouth. That video of Schaffer being assaulted was viewed over 1 million times, as was a clip in which he wrongly identified his assailants as Black Lives Matter protesters.
What happened was I just went into the Five Below to just see what was going on with some of the looting, and I was jumped by the Black Lives Matter protesters who immediately started punching and kicking me.
In fact, as Talcott later acknowledged in an interview with Tucker Carlson, the videographers had to drive 30 minutes away from the protest by Walter Wallace's neighbors in West Philadelphia to film at the retail center in another part of the city, where there were no protesters, only looters taking advantage of the overwhelmed police force. But the viral video of the attack on Schaffer struck a nerve with conservative viewers and helped to make the looting in one part of the city, not the peaceful protest in another, the focus of days of misleading, politicized coverage on Fox.
The police there were ordered to stand down as more than 1,000 BLM activists, Joe Biden voters, and anarchists looted and destroyed businesses.
While their work is mainly used to undermine left-wing protesters, Kenosha isn't the only place Riot Squad videographers have captured images of right-wing political violence. After a pro-Trump rally in Washington in December, Kalen D'Almeida, Brendan Gutenschwager, and Shelby Talcott recorded a mob of Proud Boys ripping Black Lives Matter banners from black churches and trashing or burning them. And on January 6th, Gutenschwager's viral video of the Proud Boy Dominic Pezzola using a stolen police riot shield to break a window and gain entry into the Capitol was one of the iconic images of the day. It was later used to indict Pezzola and screened by the House managers at Trump's impeachment trial. Drew Hernandez filmed Trump supporters attacking the police, but described them as patriots. Elijah Schaffer tweeted viral footage of police lines being breached and then followed people he called revolutionaries into Nancy Pelosi's office.
Check this out. We are inside Nancy Pelosi's office.
Julio Rosas showed Trump cultists battering the doors of the Capitol and then trashing the camera equipment of television crews trying to report on the raid. Richie McGinniss ended up scoring a viral hit with a friendly interview of a Trump supporter smoking a joint under the Capitol dome.
What strain is that? What strain of weed is that?
Yes, pinkberry.
Still, on Fox News and elsewhere inside the conservative media bubble, all of this video evidence of right-wing violence was not used to vilify the rioters, the way that clips of far less significant events at left-wing protests were last summer.
Yeah, maybe Michelle Obama's right. Maybe that was mostly peaceful. Depends how you define peaceful, right?
While the Riot Squad video journalists are still mostly unknown to people who are not addicted to Fox News, some of their faces have become familiar to left-wing activists. At an anti-eviction protest in Detroit in April, several activists tried to stop Brendan Gutenschwager from filming, blocking his lens and ordering him to leave.
Get out of here, you fucking nuts.
When Gutenschwager asked why, one activist, who was live streaming the protest himself, cited his presence among the pro-Trump mob on January 6th.
Dude, you were in the Capitol! No.
Next, an activist photographer got in Gutenschwager's face.
You're not fucking welcome here.
The left-wing live streamer then made it plain that he knew Gutenschwager's work by referring to him by his Twitter handle.
So this is BGO on the scene. It's not welcome here. It's not welcome here, and he continues to be here because this guy was in the Capitol building on the 6th.
According to Gutenschwager, he was then slammed into a barrier by another man who put him in a chokehold, bloodied his mouth, and hurled his camera over a fence. After he retrieved his camera, Gutenschwager was threatened by the activist photographer, who accused him of selling footage to Breitbart that could be used to identify protesters, opening them up to harassment.
Just straight up assaulted on the streets of Detroit.
Later in April, the Riot Squad's Kalen D'Almeida also ran into trouble when he was recognized while live streaming a Black Lives Matter march for Daunte Wright in Los Angeles. Since D'Almeida had spent nearly a year posing as a supporter of the racial justice movement in order to undermine it, activists stepped in as soon as his cover was blown.
Get the fuck out of here, piece of shit, we saw you!
D'Almeida was then knocked to the ground and assaulted before a female protester intervened. Another undercover right-wing videographer showed the same woman scolding D'Almeida before ordering him to leave.
Listen, people are fighting for their fucking lives. It's not a joke. Leave us the fuck alone. Get out of here. Get the fuck out of here. This is your last chance. You're lucky. Get out of here. Walk that way. Get the fuck out of here.
There have been similar scenes at right-wing rallies where Proud Boys and other militant right-wingers have attacked video journalists they suspect of being left-wing activists.
We know that you're Antifa.
That's one of the main reasons that so much of the video of the right-wing raid on the Capitol was recorded by people who at least seemed to the participants to be on their side. In this hyper-partisan environment, activists on both the right and the left fear that video will be used against them, and so prefer to have their events documented only by like-minded videographers. That's also prompted hundreds of supporters of the racial justice movement to live stream protests themselves, creating a real-time record of events that can be used to counter distortions coming from the right. It's been a year since the horrifying cell phone video of George Floyd's murder drove millions of Americans to the streets to demand justice. But it's important to keep in mind that the conservative media has been working almost nonstop to undercut the movement for Black lives by spreading the lie that the nation's main problem is the protesters, not the police.